Thank you for staying. Whatever.
Yeah, well, I'll start by the question that is by popular demand. So what was the punchline?
I must apologize because every screening, someone always asks me that question, and I wrote it down once, and I haven't used it since. So I forget, but but I think you can look it up in the Bible somewhere. It's in there, but I'm too lazy to go back and you just do one film after another and to get to the next one, hopefully, and rather than spend time on something that's been done already. But anyway, well, yeah.
Well, I wanted to go back to the horse
Okay.
for a minute, and I've often encountered an opinion that it's the most enigmatic and atypical of your works, which I do not really kind of agree with, but I know that it was inspired by Faulkner a lot, and I think the horse kind of proves that you would do such a great thing if you got a chance to work on some Faulkner's material in the longer form. And I just wanted to, in terms of like a little bit of fantasizing, but if you got a chance, what Faulkner's book, novel, or a story would you like to make a feature film of?
There's a lot of them. I mean, this was based on a novelette called The Bear, and it takes place in Mississippi. I couldn't go to Mississippi to shoot it, so we shot in a place called Shandon, which is somewhere in the middle of California, and it looks more like West Texas than anything, And so we shot what we could, try to make it look as much like the South as possible, and. But I've always been kind of like interested in Faulkner's themes and things like that. And this is the story about the bear is like the last bear hunt, a transition in the South where this sort of like well-to-do white guy inherits this horse that's dying, is hemorrhaging, and it's supposed to sort of represent kind of like the fall of the South to some extent, and so that's what it's all about, And so I was working on Killer Sheep at the time and had some little extra money, and a bunch of friends of mine, we just put together this little crew and went up and shot this film, and we. We couldn't shoot it in Los Angeles because it wasn't. It would have been better to shoot it there because it'd been right, close to home. The actor that was in the film, not to say anything bad about him, but he lived east of Los Angeles a bit, but would drive up to every morning for 2 days. I mean, like Saturday and Sunday, for 2 weeks, driving up to Shandon because he didn't want to spend the night there. And so we had to drive up there and then spend another 2 hours coming back and then going up there. It was very difficult. And so that made it very difficult for us because he just could not leave home, stay home for whatever reason. And I wasn't, he's a really good person, but I wasn't sure about the casting, but I didn't want him to look like a Southerner or someone from Texas wearing cowboy boots and all that sort of thing like that. I wanted it to be going against stereotype, and sometimes you think it. Sometimes you have to go with a stereotype. I don't know. It'd probably been easier, but so that was the whole genesis of trying to get something that looks like it but really doesn't, in a sense, and have a different look to the character. But I had some good UCLA students working with us, and so that was the nice part about it.
It's obvious why we put these two films together because there's a through line of relation. They have a relationship with the South. There's obviously, the horse is like the portrait, well, of the South, and like you said, and there are many reminiscences of the South in the Killer of Sheep. But I wanted to ask about another emblematic element that these two, symbolic element maybe, that these two films share, is your attention to the shoes of the characters. You know, like characters in both of these films are introduced from the feet up, well, the main characters, and you stayed for just enough time on the shoes of the person to make it feel meaningful. So I wanted to ask you, actually, well, how does this come up, you know, like why this way of looking at people, showing people is important for you?
Actually, I never thought about that until you just mentioned it.
Really?
Yeah, but I did spend time looking for those like old-time wingtip shoes, so to speak, you know, so I did spend some time for that. The others are just accidentally, unconsciously connected. But yeah, yeah, I spent, because I always liked those black and white, those brown and white shoes. They're so cool, but you know, I don't know.
And then the shoes in the first shoes we see in To Sleep with Anger, well, on fire. Yeah, and obviously there's, well, we get an understanding that that's a dream sequence, but you never go into the film, well, there's no explanation for it, and you love to start your films with sequences that are not narratively related to the main storyline or the main action in the film. So I just wanted to ask if, like, you don't need to give us an explanation, but a little bit about how this scene, because it's striking, it really puts you in, you know, the mood of the film and in the style of the film. So how did this scene how was it created, and like what you had in mind by putting it in the beginning?
Well, it's to foreshadow this sort of nightmare that he lost his Toby, which in the South it was a sort of a charm that I'm from Mississippi, and there were people had all these sort of magical things, you know, charms and things, and the main character, both Gideon and Harriet both lost their Tobys, which sort of is foreboding in the sense that, you know, something's going to happen if you don't have your good luck charm with you and things, and so this, and their lives sort of are parallel in a certain sense, and so that's what that is. And it's also his imagining a nightmare, you know, without it. And so that's what the whole thing is supposed to be, his nightmare in a sense.
Well, there was supposed to be another dream sequence, if I'm correct, in the film.
There were a number of things that are left out, in a sense. You know, filmmaking is all about money and scheduling and things, and the more little sequences you have in images or scenes, that it costs money, and so it's always this rush to cut out things, you know, and they feel happy because they can save money, and you know, it's one of these things about always battling producers, you know, who don't want to spend nothing on anything, you know. It's about, well, can we afford that? Yes, you can. Just, you know, and so it's one of those things where the argument is this. It's always a war between producers and directors about where the cost should be, and.
What I wanted to ask, actually, because the full screenplay was published, and so we have the knowledge of the scenes that you meant to be there, but you know, had to cut in the end. So what I wanted to ask is, which scene, maybe, which element do you regret of that film? Do you regret cutting the most?
it's been a long time since when I made the film, but there were some moments I argued with the producer about, scenes that should have been probably a little longer. But they're going to win out because it's always like, it's not only money, but it's the timing. They wanted to get it down to like, somewhere like 90 minutes or something like that, And so there were some other scenes that referred to other, these sort of like scenes that about charm and things like that, like charms, and it further carries this whole myth story. The story is based on this Georgian folklore called Hairy Man, and so there's a lot more things. There's a scene when Danny is the character he plays is doing something that relates to superstition and things like that, and because I didn't know if people would. What I wanted to do was include a lot more of that sort of mysticism in the film, so when we had a sort of like a test screening, people want to know, well, what is this about? What is this? And then the moment they start asking questions like that, it takes them out of the movie, and so we had to, cut a bit of that stuff out so they'll stay in the movie. And for me, the story was about, Southern folklore and what kind of a atmosphere it creates, and but a lot of people aren't interested in black folklore and stuff like that, except for black people more or less. But and so you're trying to tell them what our stories are about, and so the producers weren't like, well, what is this? You say, well, it's about this sort of thing like that. And they're like, well, no one's going to be interested in that, However, I was screening one of my films at Indiana University. There was this wonderful lady named Phyllis Klockman who was the first to start archiving black independent films. And so I screened one of the films at her university, at their university, and I was trying to get the money from CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcast, and so they were like against having stories that were particularly for like for people of color, and so they said, well, just stick with the middle class black story, And I said, well, that's not what the story is about. In fact, the story is about this folklore that I wanted to present. And so when the film was screened in Indiana, someone in the audience said, well, how come we can't see more films like that? And I got some little poetic justice because they were there, people in public broadcast were there, CPB, and so I had the opportunity to say, well, you have to ask these people sitting behind me because they said you wouldn't understand it. And
That's
they were
a good
like,
comeback.
Yeah, and it goes back further because when I was trying to do Sleep with Anger, there was another film that I started with first about this young girl who was killed by these gang members. And I wanted to do that because it's a serious piece because she lived in my neighborhood, of course, and then went to the same dentist. And so I felt obligated to do that story. And so as I proposed the story to CPB, and then they wanted to change it to make it more of a Hollywood film, all that sort of thing. I said, but no, it's based on the true story. And it's important that we tell this story because this lady was killed, and the police failed to do their job, and that's why she was killed, because the prosecutor, their lawyer, printed her name and address and everything in the paper, and one of the gang members, because of that, was able to track her down and kill her. And so I was sort of really obligated to make sure I got that story right. And so they start screwing around with it. And they have, I may have mentioned that how they pay you and how they force you to make these changes. They you do a portion of the script, and then if they like it, they send you a check. If they don't, they say, they said, well, the check is in the mail. Okay, so that became the theme. And I said, well, I did the work. Where's the payment? Well, the check is in the mail. Okay, and so you want to say, well, can't you go upstairs and get it? Oh, no, they didn't say it's in the mail. They say it's upstairs, you know. And you say, well, can't you go up and get it or something? And so that went on for a while. So I said, no, I can't do this. And so I said, let me do something that's just purely imaginative, and, you know, and so I won't have any feelings about it one way or the other. But you know, as you start writing on something, you know, you kind of like fall in love with it. You know, it's your stuff, and you treat it like it's some lost child or something. Anyway, so I started making, you know, saying I can't do this, you know, and this went on for a very long time. And so finally, they were very nasty about it. They said, well, you know, they kept saying the check is upstairs, and I keep saying, well, can you send it, whatever. Anyway, so and so we got to a point where I said, look, I want to take this back, you know. And so they wrote me this awful letter. And I like to tell this story because it's payback time, you know. And so, I said, I'd like to get it back from you. And so they wrote me this awful letter saying that I can't write, I'm never going to be a writer, and stuff like that, you know. And so I said, I want my story back. And so, no, before that, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around because, you know, I don't do this too often. You know, this is, anyway. And so there was Horton Foote wrote this story about this event that CPV made for their station, the PBS station. And so it was a scene where a scene where Horton Foote's character talks about the past. And this Sleep with Anger, there's a lot of it is about the past, you know, reflecting on the sequences that people have experienced, and it's always in doubt or something. And so I get this note saying, you can't do it, it's too long. I said, well, Horton Foote spent the whole there's a scene in there that goes on and on and on, you know, and they say, well, boy, you're not Horton Foote, you know. And they wrote me this letter saying, I'll never be a writer and so forth. Okay, many years later, I'm in Africa making a film, you know, and we're virtually packing up, and I get this call from the States saying that we want to give you an award. Fine, okay. So they said, but you have to be here to get it. And so I said, but I can't. I'm doing this cut in Johannesburg. Anyway, so I said, well, can someone else come and get it? You know, pick it up for me. And in the States, they said, no, you have to be here to pick it up, you know. And I'm like, oh, God, I got to come all the way back, and that's 14 hours to get back from Johannesburg to the States. And so I don't want to go because it's just too long. And so I quietly asked, I said, well, what is the award? You know, they said, it's the Horton Foote Writing Award. I said, I'll be there. No, I would have crawled there, you know. And so that was poetic justice. And not that I want revenge or anything like that, but you know, but you would like to see.
You deserved your right for revenge in that case.
Yeah, so it was pleasant having done that. So, and the auditorium was like about twice this size, filled, and of course they got a kick out of it. Yeah, so felt good.
You've mentioned that you've started this story because you wanted to do something that's purely from imagination and not based on real material, and in the process it becomes personal. And there's a lot of you in there. It seems like the boy plays the trumpet as you played the trumpet being a child. The pigeons, and I know that you also did that being a child. And also I think like the whole through line going through the film of people telling stories, you know, like, and I'm sure that there were a lot of lots of these tales based on the Bible, based on the more on the folklore, based on the something traditional, based on the experience of being in the South that were told and retold in your house when you were a kid. Which of these stories still stay with you? You know, if you could tell just one for us, that would be, you know.
Well, yeah, I think. Well, first of all, I used to play a trumpet, and that's my kid out there playing. But he's almost up. He can almost reach the ceiling. You know, now he's so tall. He's like 6'6" or 6'1.5" or something like that. Yeah. I think they were brought up on McDonald's, you know, and because that's all they ate. Like, I mean, the kids are really funny because how they get to become aware of McDonald's is amazing. Because I remember when they couldn't even talk right, they were talking about McDonald's. Both of them wanted, you know, and but they also they also ate up everything in the house. So I didn't get very much of anything, basically, because it was all, you know, we would cook, and then they'll go, right after eating, they'll go right into the refrigerator, you know, and looking around. They said, but you just ate. They was always hungry, you know. That's what kids are. But anyway, you know, it was, yeah, I played the trumpet, had pigeons, and I'll tell you another crazy story. There's a thing called, there's an organization that's about completion bond people in the industry, where you have to go before this was a little old man, you know, and in the script there was this thing about pigeons, you know, flying and tumbling. And I used to raise pigeons, you know, and you spend a lot of money on pigeons because they were very expensive at the time. And I don't know why, I should have been doing other things, but I had this, I think I learned how to read by getting pigeon books, you know, and just scouring those and getting all this stuff about it. And so I had the scene about pigeons in the script, and so I took it to, you know, I had to go by the completion bond person, and he read it, and the first thing he focused on was, well, how are you going to make these pigeons do that? It's like, it's kind of surprising because it's like you have a dog, right? And you have a dog barking in the scene, and someone asks you, well, how are you going to make the dog bark? It's like a double take. Well, they do it automatically. You know, it's not that you have to train them to do it. I mean, and that's why they cost so much, because they're like, you know, special birds that, you know, you pay a lot of money for, and they fly around and they roll down. Sometimes you call them suicide because they like get that high in the sky and they roll down and they kill themselves because they just have this thing of just rolling down. And that's why they cost so much, because, you know, they tumble, and the kids just sit there and just watch them all day instead of doing work, you know, schoolwork. You just watch pigeons for some reason, hypnotized by it. So anyway, he refused to understand, you know, and so I kept saying, no, they do that. And he said, well, how do they do it? I said, they just do it. It's in their genes, you know. It's, you know, and it's you know, if you raise pigeons, it's you know already what they are. You know, we used to have birds that were like almost as big as a turkey. I mean, they come in all sizes, you know. And so anyway, I couldn't get him to see that, and I got to a point where I'm about to say, forget it. You know, I won't use pigeons. I won't anything. And so finally, he sort of like gave in and just turned the page and just didn't any more about it. And they gave me an opportunity to throw him in there. But you get that, you know. People, if they don't know it, it doesn't exist for them, you know. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to, you know, because we were Billy and a lot of us, and Ben Caldwell and a lot of people who were at UCLA at the time, we wanted to give voice to our experience, you know. And so that was the purpose of telling our story, you know. I remember, just correcting a lot of things. I screened the film in Hawaii, at the festival there. And at the end of the screening, there was an audience asking questions and things like that. And one of the things you get, strangely enough, is this lady in Hawaii, after the film, says, I didn't know black people had washing machines. He said, and it strikes you, even though you know that's going to come up because, you know, in America, we don't share you know, what other minorities and people do. You know, they know nothing about us, basically, you know, and they have, you know, it's amazing how much you have to tell them and where they get their information from. You know, Birth of a Nation just crippled, you know, our experience or how we fit in America, you know. And like, I was talking to Martin, who was a historian or something, and we were talking about Reconstruction, that whole period where W.E. Du Bois had to write a book for people to understand what it was really about, you know. And that's how people relate to one another, not really having too much contact with them or understanding. But we wanted to correct a lot of those things. You know, and so when we were at UCLA, our purpose was to tell our stories, you know, the right way, in a sense. So, yeah. Yes.
Before I'll stop being selfish and give the audience some chance to ask a question, I still need to ask that because obviously Danny Glover's character is this sort of visual center of the film. You know, he attracts attention, but the moral center of the film is the character Susie.
Yes.
Yeah, and wonderfully acted by Mary Ellis, and who died recently, I think. So if you could tell a little bit about how it was working with her, because she has such a presence.
She was just a great person to work with, very experienced. And I hadn't worked with professional actors. You know, non-actors had this sort of neorealistic idea about acting, you know, things like that. And that you don't use professional people, and supposedly this illusion that non-actors give you a better performance, which isn't the case all the time, you know. And you learn that, I mentioned it at some other place, where if you're making an independent film and you're trying to save money and time, actors, professional actors with a lot of experience, are the best thing to go, because if you have to make an adjustment, they can do it like that, you know. Whereas people who are not professional, you know, if you don't typecast them perfectly, then there's this discussion that goes on that takes a lot of time, and so it's not a very good experience, particularly when you have producers there wanting, looking at a clock, saying, well, you know, hurry up, and so forth. But I'm glad you brought that, because I wanted Mary Alice to be something like The Possessed or An Idiot, where this thing of being innocent, you know, where it becomes a danger to people around them. Because you can't be naive and being in a situation like she is, or being in South Central, let's say. And you have to be almost like a Hattie who's seen life, you know, and can recognize danger, particularly if you have kids and people are very vulnerable around you. And so I borrowed from Pushkin, I borrowed from everybody, let me put it that way, you know. Just wherever I could, you know. I didn't mind telling him where I got it from, whatever it is, you know. I don't think you call it borrowing or stealing, but it's, you know, you're influenced by, you know, it's a better word to say than borrowed or stolen, whatever. But you have no shame when you're trying to get the film done, you know. I don't know how many you knew that it was from Pushkin, one of those lines in there Danny says, you know, I look for hope ahead or whatever it is and so forth. But, you know.
I think the Pushkin quote, well, you give him the quote, and I think what impresses me even most is not that he knows Pushkin. It's the line he says after this. It's from Pushkin. You don't know him. Yeah. You know, that says a lot about him. You know? This you don't know him.
Yeah. But he gives the impression that he has a much closer relationship with. But that's how arrogant he was.
And this character, I think, the character of Harry, I think he was supposed to have, you know, his background presented more in the film. in the script, that in the larger version of the script?
Well, actually, Danny really saved us, because when he came in, like studios and things became interested. Before, it was taking the script around, they looked at it was, well, what is this? It's not a film, anything like that. We're not interested in it. There's no money in it and things like that. And so when Danny said he would do it, they were like, oh, it's a movie now. Yeah. And but the thing was, when I thought of the character of Harry, I had seen Julius Harris, who plays the guy with and he was in Nothing But a Man, which was a great film, and so I initially wanted him to play the part, and because Danny at the time, well, there was this notion that because it was an older part, he was a little afraid of being typecast as an older person. So, but he read the script and says, I really like to really read for the character of Harry. And we said, go right ahead, because that made it happen, And he was really a wonderful person to work with. In fact, all the actors were just really, really great people to sort of help me out, because I had done independent films, but with non-professional actors. And I remember Mary Alice. We were doing this scene in the kitchen where, her and her son are talking, whatever. I should say she and her son, but anyway. So, when we're doing independent film, you tell the actor, just walk in in the kitchen, Then, so we were in a hurry, and she says, well, what is my motivation? Where am I coming from? And you say, well, just come in the kitchen, don't worry about that other stuff. Just come in the kitchen. And she was very polite, and she didn't say, don't you know how to direct? And anything like that. But so I said, well, you're doing this and that to come in and this. But I learned pretty quickly, so I know that when she was very nice and then didn't browbeat me about my being unprofessional and not knowing anything about directing. And so I knew immediately what I should have said. I never made that mistake again, So, but she was very great. So, I remember using non-actors, and it's like, well, for example, a gross thing that happened. When I was doing Killer Sheep, a friend of mine who grew up in my neighborhood, I used him several times, and I would say, well, do this or whatever it is, or something like that. They didn't have to have any motivation or anything. Just do it, okay. And it worked. But there was this one, so for example, one of the actors in Killer Sheep got ill. And so I'm saying, we're shooting next week, whatever it is. Oh, but I can't, I'm really sick right now. I said, okay, well. He says, well, can another friend of ours was in the same scene or available? So he said, can he take my place? And we already shot some stuff on him, some film on him. And I'm like, it doesn't click, do it? We can't interchange, we can't use different people in the same scene, in your role, because we already shot them.
Buñuel did that once, though.
Huh?
Buñuel did that once, though.
Sorry,
Luis Buñuel did it once, but that was, intentional. The film where two actresses play the same character, and nothing is explained about how they change the bodies.
Well, I did something like that, to be honest with you, and surprisingly, no one caught it here, which is, I guess, good in one hand, and it's very obvious. It's like an elephant. Is that like having two different elephants or something like that? Well, the horse in the film, I had to change horses. Yeah. And the first horse you see is this old black horse that, two things. It's the guy we borrowed the horse from, took him to the glue factory before we were finished. He thought we were finished. And so we drive all the way up to Shandon, whatever, and we're looking for the horse. He said, well, where's the horse? Well, he passed on. And so, but the only horse was this young colt that is a chestnut coat, and the other horse was this black horse that had bones showing and stuff like that, you know. And I kept wondering if people are going to see that, you know. And I screened it for several people, and they didn't notice anything about it, you know. And so, you know, it's amazing what you can do.
Yeah, well, we still have some time. I wanted to ask if anybody in the audience has questions.
Thanks, Charles. This is a softball question for you on our historical theme. But watching this film now, I thought, okay.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I said watching this film now, like
Yeah.
in 2022, I thought, okay, we've had respectability politics, we've had the prosperity gospel, we've had all the, you know, the kind of new Booker T. Washington, talented 10th, mind your own business, like black middle class rising story. And I wondered, I was like, did you make this film consciously or unconsciously as a critique of black middle class life in that, you know, in this way? Because that's my softball question for you. Take it away.
Well, I think it's more the case in Killer Sheep, and in some other films I did that, you know, talks about, you know, the black family, and particularly the black middle class, and the conflict between them, the black middle class, and just the average person, black person who didn't get the opportunities that middle class blacks may have gotten. Because, I mean, there used to be this dichotomy between them meaning the middle class and the poor. And because we were, one of the things I wanted to sort of talk about is this distortion and exaggeration between the two classes, you know, and that it did exist, and it wasn't quite as what do you say, like violently, or the relationship is so torn that it created a lot of physical problems between it. But there was this image that black middle class had a way of dealing with poor blacks, and almost in the same way that, but not quite as you know, disturbing as white and black differences, you know. And so we used to, there used to be a sort of hostile kind of tension in relationship there. And, you know, I'm from, you know, a working class kind of environment where, you know, they used to have, you know, these relationships between, you know, light-skinned blacks and dark-skinned blacks and things like that, that a lot of us suffered from, you know. And so every chance not every chance, but often we would make fun of that, you know. And my brother's wedding, we see the most differences, where Pierce, one of the main characters in it, his brother is a lawyer, and he's marrying this middle-class black woman who they don't get along at all, because Pierce romanticizes, you know, the poor and all this sort of thing, and rather than embracing both and taking the best of both, you know, the best of both worlds. And so there was this attitude that exists, and I always thought it was rather silly, but, you know, because it was like, you know, have you ever been to Soweto? Anybody?
In South Africa, right?
Yeah. Well, if you go there, I mean, when it existed, for example, everyone lived in the same community in Soweto. And when I went there, you know, it was, when you talk about a ghetto, that is what a ghetto is. It's like LA, New York, whatever it is. It's like maybe, 10 blocks or whatever number of square miles. It's like that. But when you go to something like Soweto, or I forget what, it's another one in Cape Town. And it's like when you drive to Soweto, you drive up to it, I mean, miles away, and you see the smoke haze over the city, but it's endless. It goes from one horizontal to the other. It's like if you go into New York, to Manhattan, how you come in from Brooklyn, and it's like across the horizon. You're overwhelmed because you never seen anything that big. And that's the difference, you know. And so, you know, you can talk about Watts, whatever it is, but it has nothing like in Soweto, you know. And that's when you see that what the world is like, you know. And so anyway, but what I was trying to say was that in those places like that, it's a different kind of environment, and because everyone lives in that ghetto, doctors, lawyers, whatever it is, are there. Where in Los Angeles and New York and everything, people have the opportunity to move in different parts of what they call the ghetto and the black experience, you know. And so it's a difference. And so anyway, it's different. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just going off of these.
No, it's wonderful.
Two questions about each movie in order. One, the editing of the Samuel Barber piece was incredible, so I wanted to know how you chose that. Knoxville Summer 1915, which was this gorgeous James Agee and Samuel Barber that you just used so perfectly. So how did that happen? And then two, who was Harry in folklore? You talked about how there was a folkloric figure of Harry.
Yeah. You have to excuse me because I jump around a lot and I can't keep it straight thought. Oh, what was Harry and what did...
You said that there's a figure of Harry in folklore.
Yes, yes.
Folklore, yeah.
Didn't like him. To me, that's fascinating. So who was that figure?
He was in Georgia folklore. And I was interested in folklore because my neighbors and stuff like that, they would have this porch life, you know, an oral element to, you know, their stories and so forth. They would always talk about the South in Mississippi or Arkansas or Texas, because everyone in Los Angeles, they were from, you know, Texas, Arkansas, all this place, all place southern. And so you had that environment, you know. You had everything that you found in Georgia, Alabama, whatever it is, but less mosquitoes, let me put it that way, you know. And I used to, God, one thing that drove me out of there was the mosquitoes. You know, I couldn't deal with it, you know.
Was there an original story?
Yes, sir, there is. It's a story called Harry Man. And not only is it from the South, but it's also, you find it in non-industrial societies, you know, like rural, traditional areas and things like that. And in foreign countries too, you know. And we also share that sort of, those myths and things like that. And, you know, I mean, the thing about it was that when we were coming and living in Los Angeles and places like that, and I'm sure it happens in New York too, and Brooklyn and all those places, now, we were always embarrassed about being from the South, you know. It was like, you know, we'd say anything except we were from the South, you know. And it was a shame because, you know, it's, you know, we just had that negative attitude. And because of that, we didn't want to have the same jobs our parents had, you know. They were good jobs, but we just abandoned a lot of those, you know, like carpentry and housework and stuff like that. But now you have to go to university to get those jobs and so forth, you know. It's strange how things turn around.
I think Harry was, in folklore, he's this rebellious trickster, basically, this rowdy rebel figure.
Yeah, but I didn't want Harry to have a direct physical, to say that, no, he is bad or whatever it is. I wanted it to be subjective in a way, whereas I was mentioning my sister-in-law would, I would go away and, you know, like I am now, you know, things like, and every time I would come back, it would always be something broken, you know, and and I kept accusing her of being responsible, you know, and I had to get over and train myself to forget about that. That's just coincidence, you know, and it has nothing to do with reality. It doesn't that she had any bad karma or anything like that. But I couldn't get over that for the longest. I had to stop and train myself that it isn't her. It's just, it happens that way. It's just coincidence, you know. And I remember this one producer when I did Nightjohn as a story about slavery. I was with this producer, and he said to me, would I do him a favor? I said, sure, what is it? When we go looking for locations, what I want you to do is, when we get on the plane, board the plane, you put your right foot on first. I said, okay, all right. If would that make you happy? And so every time we'd board a plane to go somewhere, I had to, and he would stand right behind me, looking like this, you know. So I put my right foot on first. And so this would go on and on and on. And, you know, for the longest, it took me to unlearn that, you know. And every time I would not do that, every time I failed to put whatever foot it was, I always felt guilty and afraid to fly, you know. And so to get up, I would always shuffle my foot in, you know. And it's so easy to do that, you know. And you have to go through this whole training of not, Charles, it's just superstitious, nothing to it. You know, first of all, just do it and then make everybody happy. But in order to get back to normal, you have to really strain and forget about a lot of things. Anyway, that's...
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because another screening is soon. Thank you, Charles. That was wonderful.